All right, well, welcome back to Beyond the Noise, media that's moving Portland. So we're here to raise some funding today for Open Signal and City Club of Portland, where I work, and also Kickstand Comedy. So we do encourage you after this to check out giveguide.org, and there's a great directory of nonprofits that's alphabetical, so just look them up. $10 minimum and lots of cool prizes. Next, we're going to hear from some community storytellers. So they're more in a grassroots space. They're folks who produce podcasts, documentaries, a variety of multimedia. And moderating this panel is Chris Williams from Kickstand Comedy and Front Porch Sessions. Hand it off to Chris.
All right, thank you very much. This is our second panel today, and it's titled Sharing the Meaning. It's the exact same format as the first panel. It's going to be very conversational. And at the end, we're going to have about 10 minutes for audience questions again. And this panel, we're going to be hearing from local independent media makers, podcasters, filmmakers, and of course, storytellers about how community-based storytelling serves audiences differently from traditional journalism. So let's meet our panelists. First, we have community organizer, multimedia journalist, and filmmaker, Rania Salvant. Next up, we have John Lugton, who's Director of Production Services at Metro East. Then we have writer and organizer at Respond to Racism, Bruce Poinsett. And last, we have independent producer and documentarian, Aaron Yankee. Before we get into the first prompt, I just wanted to ask all of you for briefly, what are you currently working on right now? And we can start here.
Is this on? Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. I am currently working on graduating. That is actually what is happening.
Okay. Yeah, give it up for graduating.
Thank you. Yes.
Absolutely.
I'm at the University of Oregon. I'm doing my program in Masters in Multimedia Journalism here in Portland. And it's been a ride, but honestly, my capstone project centers cultural bereavement because my family and I, we are refugees from Haiti. And this was during 1991. So I'm exploring the history of our migration story and how that impacts mental health and also just overall health systems within migrant and refugee communities. So that's currently where my focus should be. So yeah, that's me.
Awesome. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm working on a couple of things. One of them is with the Multnomah County Health Department, trying to break down some of the stigmas around drug and alcohol recovery. So have been diving into that and have 4 pretty intense interviews that need to get cut down shortly. Also working on a cookery show of all things, which has a little bit of a unique flavor. This episode is based with a Bosnian chef. We go shopping with a host in a Russian market, and then actually next Tuesday we'll be in his restaurant as he cooks. And then everybody gets together and has a conversation. And during that conversation, it builds and it builds and it becomes geopolitical. They talk about love, they talk about loss, so many things.
Thank you. John, I had a whole conversation with you. I had no idea you had an accent.
Scottish.
Bruce.
So our organization, Respond to Racism, is actually also in the Give Guide. So giveguide/nonprofits or giveguide.org/nonprofits/RTR. And Respond to Racism is a anti-racism education nonprofit based in Clackamas County. So again, giveguide.org/nonprofits/RTR.
That's what you're working on right now. Yeah, that's good.
I have recently edited a book. We're having a book release party December 6th at Blackwater from 6 to 9 p.m. It's all ages. It's a book called This is a Message to Persons Unknown. It's about Poison Girls, a anarchist punk band active from about 1977 to 85. And how the larger story is like creating your own culture, having your own values. If you don't see yourself represented in the world, here's one way you could do it. Things were very different at the time, and there's still many, many lessons to learn from the past and how people lived in freedom and solidarity, and how we can take those lessons and live in freedom and solidarity now.
All right. Thank you very much. We have a very active panel. I like it. All right. So we have, I think, less than an hour. So let's just jump right into it. Rania, let's start with you. The prompt is why we tell stories, but I'm also interested in how did you first get into community-based or independent storytelling?
Yeah, I honestly, it's just so interesting the ways in which we begin to understand stories on a more public level. I think one thing that I can say we all do as people is we tell stories to ourselves, to our family members, and they're private. But when you start to examine how the public is experiencing the day-to-day and how you can come into those spaces and help facilitate conversations and stories, that becomes a different lens in which you need to view how you approach it. So when I started with my school, it was actually in our class with Afani Bell, where we had to go into the community and tell a story through the lens of a community group or whomever. We came across an organization called Portland Harbor Community Coalition, and we were originally going to tell their story and the work that they're doing near the river. But then the executive director told us about this group called the York Work Group. And they were fairly new. They were getting started on a couple advocacy work with the city to try and get an idea of anti-displacement strategies put into place through urban planning practices that the city was conducting at the time, specifically with the MPAT plan. And I just remember thinking, I don't know what any of this is, but I'm fascinated by it because this was a group of elders, a group of young folks coming together to figure out how they could build a space for themselves, and not just for themselves, but the communities that they represented. And this is me coming into this space. I think it was by year 2 I was in Portland. I was still trying to understand Portland's history. I also understood as well that I needed to be a part of this process in a way that allowed me to really take in historical information and not insert my own experiences, because I've experienced displacement myself. I think if anything, I got to create a bridge between myself and these group of folks because I had a similar background in displacement, but I had to recognize my story or what I experienced is not at all what they experienced, especially how it has come about intergenerationally. They are a group of people who have been displaced in Albina. The person that started the organization, Obie Hill, he's a Vanport flood survivor. We have people who were supposed to live over in Gouds Lake Courts before it was dismantled again, and that was supposed to be an African-American community back in the day as well that not a lot of people know about. We have people from Russellville. So it was taking time to understand the breadth and depth of this community, and being someone that could just say, okay, I'm going to take a step back and mostly listen. I don't want to have to insert what I think should be the conversation. So when we actually met them for the first time, one of the first things that one of the elders told us was, why do y'all feel like you can come in here and tell our story? And I was just like, oh, you're right. Like, yes, why do we feel that our positionality allows us to have access to, honestly, some of the most traumatic experiences in your lives that you have to continue to retell over and over again? So through that, we were able to be very candid with each other. We were able to also express, like, I am, yes, a Black individual, but I'm not from here. The rest of my cohort, they were white individuals, also not from here. So we were really coming in and not having any understanding. And I don't know what it was about that moment, but it really centered me. And that's when I think I started to begin to see this place as a home as well, because that was taking some time. It was the heart to heart that really motivated me to be like, okay, what does it look like to really help them tell the story? And this was actually during the time, well, no, I took Andrew's class afterwards, but it helped me see that we were needing to be more community centered in our reporting. And even when we were interviewing them, we asked them questions like, hey, does this question fit what we're trying to do in this interview right now? We did pre-interviews beforehand. We went to their meetings. We showed up to some of the city council meetings they would go to testify. We like really put ourselves, not so much in the story, but into their lives, into their experiences. So that's what's motivated me so far, and just knowing this is definitely the track that I want to be on when it comes to storytelling. I want to be a part of the community, and it's helped me explore different forms of journalism, like advocacy journalism. I mentioned community-centered journalism. There's even a branch called solutions journalism that I find quite fascinating, because I have been and always will be a community organizer first. And that's what's brought me into this space.
All right.
I'm done ranting. Okay.
Oh, that's great. Thank you.
Great.
Just hand it off to me. I would say I agree with just all of what you've said, and I think that's the most difficult thing. And being an older white guy, there's a lot of privilege that comes with that. But I've also been really fortunate to have been allowed into situations like you described, whereby I shouldn't really be there, but I get to meet these people. We get to do pre-interviews. We get to talk about whatever we want to talk about. And then we kind of agree on what we want to do for the story. The story finding aspect of it can't always just be driven by the filmmaker or the documentarian. We have to, you know, change that lens slightly and get into the participant mode of having them sort of give input as much as they can, because sometimes the people who are asking us to make a story, it's just an idea of what they think will work. And actually when you dig a little deeper, there's a much better, richer story underneath, and that only comes through a personal interaction, a conversation, and really being honest about your kind of integrity is not the right word, but your kind of intention there. It's like, I'm not trying to set you up. There's no gotchas coming at you. And yes, you can look at some of this as we go through the process. Things that I would never have done years ago, but now it's a lot more natural, and it's just a lot more responsive to what I think people need to have happen when they become the subject.
So I want to speak to, there's another question on here about how come many journalists are branching into podcasts and documentaries and other independent storytelling, because it is also how I got into my own independent storytelling.
Okay.
So my first project that really got a lot of traction was the Blacktastic Adventure, which was basically a virtual interview series with Black Oregonians from around the state to, you know, again, these stories don't get covered generally unless you have people who have these relationships. And I got my start in journalism at the Scanner in 2011. Blacktastic Adventure was a 2020 project. It was also very much a business decision. You know, I started the Scanner in 2011, ended in 2013, freelance with a lot of like justice organizations, equity organizations, and one of the projects I got to work on was with, as Donovan mentioned in the panel before, the great Intezar Albiotto. I got to travel around the state with her to do case studies for the Urban League State of Black Oregonian, or State of Black Oregon 2015. And again, just like interviewing people from around the state. In some cases, just watching Intezar like cold reach out to people and just research and say, oh, I want to cover your story. And I was like, I joked about calling it just, was it Bruce and Intezar's Blacktastic Adventure at the time, you know? And so when I had the opportunity in 2020, because basically the media landscape was changing, I was mostly writing up until 2019, but then you got to diversify your portfolio. And when I took a digital marketing class, one of the things they talked about was just like, do more video content. And what happens? We enter a pandemic where a lot of people are becoming more accustomed to Zoom. So on one hand, it's like a low bar of entry, but it's also an opportunity to say, oh, let me continue this project that was so, enriching and good earlier, but through this format. And basically, yeah, so it was about, again, reaching out to people. I think Intezar was my first interview. Donovan was probably my second interview, actually. And just kind of building it out from there. And you get to cover a lot of stories. You get to cover organizations, because we talked in the panel, or you all talked in the panel earlier about, what is newsworthy and what's not newsworthy. So a lot of what's serving Black Oregonians may not be the necessarily top news story to the larger audience, but whether it's, a lot of it is so much like placemaking work, whether it's in Bend or in Ashland or Astoria or Eastern Oregon, and being able to cover these things, being able to cover groups. One of the stories that, again, got traction with Oregon Humanities covered this group, the Fathers Group in Bend, which was just a group of Black fathers taking it upon themselves to kind of build community and serve wherever, Black Oregonians in that part of the state needed. Yeah. And again, it got picked up, but it was just, again, like an opportunity to, in some cases, you get to like set these priorities that people take on later. And, newsrooms, more established organizations will see and say, ooh, I want to cover that. And I think there's a prompt later about how we collaborate with major media, but one of the things I learned from working at the Scanner is that this is an ecosystem. So larger newspapers, they're following what you do because maybe they're not as tapped in on the ground. And that works with independent media as well. So just being able to take advantage of that dynamic was really a huge point and huge aspect of these independent projects, and being able to also feed it into, covering stories that are, I guess, in conversation with what people are dealing with in life, so that, yeah, it may be a small platform, but you can get some traction because, again, it's speaking to what people are speaking to, or speaking to what people's needs are.
Thanks.
I have a large multicultural family that likes to tell stories and sits around and tells stories. And so if you can't get a word in edgewise, you learn to listen to the stories, and then you can repeat them later in maybe a place where people have listening skills. One hand. On the other, I don't like working. I don't like jobs. I will work so hard for myself and my community, my own projects, but getting paid to do something that you're not interested in is the worst, and I don't understand why our entire culture is based on that. So let's change that. Cool. But as a graduate of KBOO Community Radio, everything that I learned there by meeting community people, is an excellent crossroads in the 80s and 90s to meet all kinds of people that in a segregated Portland you wouldn't meet if you were just stuck with your segregated neighbors or your class roles of, whatever, all the other things. So in Portland was a very different time when I first started volunteering at KBOO. My rent was $80. It was a beautiful, beautiful time to have free time to do what you wanted. And I didn't know what I wanted. So, but what a cool place to like meet a bunch of different people and figure out what you could want. This is the third thing of the thing, and then I'll stop talking.
Oh, no.
You're good.
The also being an angry teenager in Reagan's 80s, you didn't necessarily think you're going to live because we were going to die in a nuclear war that he would just casually joke about, be like, oh, bombs are going off in 5 minutes. So there wasn't a lot of future to believe in, so you didn't you didn't save for a future, because we wouldn't have one. So having being part of the punk rock culture, we're just like, it's all or nothing, and it's now, and we don't know how to do anything, and no one is understanding our teenage energy and anger and angst. So we're going to do it ourselves. We're going to make a lot of mistakes. We're going to be super sloppy and messy, but we're going to make our own music. We're going to yell about everything that is frustrating. It's and it was like, we're really, if we don't get to be alive for, 20 years, like, we're going to really live these last 5 years that we have, because we're not going to make it.
Yeah.
So there's a passion of finding your voice and telling your stories in a time where you're not necessarily sure that there's a future to have. And I think those things, then when you're like, oh, check it out, we didn't die. Now what do we do? Because we're
Yeah.
so finding places like KBOO and places where you can explore like what it is like to also because we knew how it felt to really live and not care about we could just be honest and say what we wanted and just be ourselves. So you can't go back once you've done that. So then you can't really fit in. And then what do? Like, well, I know how to
great.
listen to people's stories and tell them. So then, et cetera, et cetera. I'm sure we'll get to more of it later.
Yeah, it's time to move to the next
Oh.
section. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah.
Y'all are so interesting. I had so many other questions to ask.
But good thing you're the moderator.
I just, that's true.
Yeah.
Bruce, let's start with you on this one. We're moving to prompt 2, which is community POV, or point of view. What do you think distinguishes community-based storytelling from traditional reporting and entertainment media? And I do want to say, just in listening to the four of you right there, I'm beginning to see how closely journalism and storytelling, like those lines are so blurred. I'm really interested in this. So,
Well, this kind of speaks to the previous panel again and the conversation around being more embedded in the community. I think not necessarily all community-based journalism, but at least when done really well, is a little bit closer to the ground, a little bit more tapped in with people. And in terms of like just distinguishing the two, I'll go back to the example that was talked about earlier as far as like the officialness we kind of give to what the police say as like a source, for example. So you can see a bunch of single source stories, which are generally frowned upon in larger media because they talk to the police spokesman. But part of that is just an infrastructure thing. Like, the police spokesman's job is literally to do, to be accessible to media all the time, to give that perspective. And if you get that, even though I think Donovan was talking earlier about using like gang-related, and how many times you see gang-related shooting or gang-related activity, and you see that story that gets corrected 3 days later, but you still treat that as an official source. Whereas if you just talk to someone in the community who doesn't have a title by their name, or something that marks them as much more legitimate, we're told to treat that with more skepticism. With independent projects, I feel like you have more ability and more latitude to kind of, give more, how can I put more focus on those voices. So when I look at something, whether it's the Blacktastic Adventure or a project I did with Respond to Racism, Life After the Bubble, which talked with former students who went through Lake Oswego schools, classes of 2006 through 2021, you're able to like give voices to, or even talk about like one of Aaron's projects, It Did Happen Here in Anti-Fascist People's History, where you're able to like center these voices that are generally, just not given that official capacity, and give the time and energy to really dig into those stories and give those perspectives to people in a way that you're also, I think in like newsrooms generally, like if you work at the Oregonian, you might have a quota to put out this many stories each day where you don't have the time to dig into these things. And that affects what you're able to talk about. That also affects, again, if the police spokesman is readily available to you, that's easier to tell a story. If an official of the city is readily available to you, that's easier to tell a story or easier to put something out. If someone knows how to put a press release together and knows how to appeal to you as a journalist, most people, again, don't go through journalism school to do that. So who is accessible to you, what makes it easier for you to produce is very much structural. With the independent storytelling, you just have a little bit more ability to go into these places and go and talk to people who don't get heard as much.
Yeah.
Thank you.
I actually wanted to reference one of the questions in here about just sharing an example of a story that had a tangible impact in a local community. So for those who aren't familiar with the name York, and some of you might be, but York was an enslaved member on the Corps of Discovery. And after the bus fell, the group that I was referencing, the York Work Group, who now they're formed into the York Collective, have been doing work for the last 3 years in trying to communicate not just the history of York, but the history of the Black community in Portland as a whole. And what I've noticed is just in trying to have conversations with each other about their Black experiences here, that's what all that was. I think sometimes when we think about storytelling and we think about reporting or journalism, we have this really big idea of what it really all entails process-wise. But what I've come to see is that it's about the conversations we have, and that was referenced in the first panel. Donovan, I think, actually spoke to that. When you are having your heart-to-heart moments, when you are actually communicating to another human being, really the story is there. And we did that every week live, sometimes in person, sometimes over Zoom, but we were just communicating what ailed us, what gave us joy, and through that we found the story. You know, we completed in 10 weeks, because of our class assignment, this video called Remembering York about the group, but then the story continued on from there for another 2 years. We're still working on this project, but what sprouted from it were so many other folks inspired by just the idea of York and what that could motivate in a group. So my friend Aaron Nigel Smith came out with the York Folk Opera because of that. And he was inspired by Obie Hill and by the group because he wanted to see what it could look like to tell it in a different format. These stories, sometimes when we're looking at news outlets that do have a shorter time frame to be able to communicate what's happening in the moment, when you look at independent storytelling and community-based storytelling, that's when you are given the opportunity to tell it beyond just a snapshot. And I think that's what's beautiful about filmmaking. As a filmmaker myself, I've been with Aaron for the last 2 years documenting the making of this production. And I remember thinking, okay, when he gave me the task, he was like, "Are you interested?" I was like, yes, this sounds lovely, just because I was thinking about the musical aspect and just the entire artistic endeavor. And then I started looking up things like how, you know, what other examples can I pull from to really tell a story of a making of a production? And it sat at the surface level for me in the beginning. It was like, I'm looking at this production, I'm looking at this musical, but in the 2 years, that's when I got to explore the people who were a part of the process. We were exploring this story through the lens of Aaron, but I remember telling Aaron on the side halfway through, like a year in, I was like, the stories of your creative team, of the cast members, like, they are moved by what we are doing actively. And it was beautiful because the folk opera is a community-based story. I personally think it's something that it snapshots in a way, I would call it reporting, to be honest, because we're watching what was crafted over 2 years be put on stage for an hour and a half. That's immense. And then to watch people change through that process. There were young kids who played young Clark and young York who were moved not just artistically, but by the story of what does it mean to be friends one moment, and then we're 10 years old, and now I serve you. Like, these are complex narratives, and that's really what these stories are when we communicate what's going on in our city, what's going on when we're trying to create spaces within our city, but then we're coming across tensions on a city level, on a state level. And that's what I was able to capture and understand. When we look at how independent storytelling comes in many different formats, we are seeing a breadth and depth of the story beyond just that moment in time. So that's just something I wanted to share, and it had a beautiful impact.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I'll jump in with something. I don't know. So maybe I don't know if it says tangible. The word tangible was used. So I'll talk about a little bit about views. So, folks, the nonprofit I work for, we have cable channels, and we don't get to know how many people watch them. Probably not very many, to be honest. But you know, maybe loads. We just don't know. We can't get those numbers. So the internet and everything like that is fantastic. You know, we can see how many, you know, views and things like that. So, but how often does it get really interesting? Well, we made a video with an organization about sex trafficking, very short, like a PSA, where we had the police officer and the victim, and it was a very, very difficult and emotional shoot, but the folks in the end said, yes, we want to do this, and they launched it on the day, on the, you know, sex trafficking awareness day, which becomes the month. 10,000 views later. That was great. It was absolutely fantastic. Whatever they did really, really worked, and they were so pleased. This was 10 years ago. I got a call about 3 months ago from an organization asking if they could have that video. It's not mine to give away, but just that moment there. We made a lovely video called Follow the Water, and the other side of that video was some how-to videos on lawn maintenance. But we had an environmental edge to it, because we all, or we don't all, but many people put chemicals on their lawn. So we made this little teaser whereby the baby go, no, lift the baby off the lawn, and the green splodgy feet, and the dog's gonna go, oh, no. So we made this 100,000 views. It just shows that something like that, you know, when it catches the interest, when you have the right kind of people promoting it and putting it in the right place, we can have that kind of community impact. I know it's very different to what you just spoke about, but it was a unique opportunity that just suddenly blossomed. And that was just, we didn't expect that to happen. It was a how-to video, and we were just making something to promote it. So it's crazy at times, but it was really impactful for the people. That's what I felt. If you watched it, you were suddenly going to go, oh, yeah, I'm not going to let my dog out back, am I? So.
Oh, yeah.
So there's another question on here. How does your audience or community shape the direction of your storytelling? And I think about this in terms of, again, independent media, but there was a question earlier about intergenerational media engagement. And one of the things with working in Clackamas County and Lake Oswego specifically is just working with a older population and kind of somewhat isolated population. Like, I like to touch on the topic of propaganda a lot. Like, just by, I don't know, show of hands here. I know this isn't going to come up on the actual broadcast later, but how many people have heard the term propaganda before? That's like a 30% in here. Basically just like how police shape how we view media or how we view stories. And I talked earlier about like the police spokesman, but you know, it's a larger infrastructure, but I think about it in terms of older populations. So the police spokesman or the police spokesperson's job is also to go to neighborhood association meetings and I was about to curse. Scare the crap out of older people, or, you know, go to the elder coffee meeting and give that perspective. And when we talk about like why the police perspective is so normalized and it's okay to just take it at face value, it's not just a thing where we're like, oh, we're socialized to see that title. It's also how it interacts in people's lives, and especially interacts with the people who are consuming, say, K2 News, which is owned by Sinclair. You know, how people who just watch any local news, frankly, I tend to single out K2, just again, Sinclair Media. It's it's a larger discussion, but when you have that combination of the people who are able to like interact with these populations who are consuming it, and then you watch local news doing these like Portland's on fire, or we need more police because Portland is on fire, and you get that over and over and over and over again, it shapes a narrative. And so when it comes to like talking about that, especially talking about it to an audience who normalizes that, that's very much a thing of like, oh, I'm speaking to this older audience in this isolated place who are ready-made to hear this, so I need to be able to explain how this works, why it's important to get these other perspectives, why it's important to be like, don't you find it kind of strange that you're being scared to not visit the restaurants you love because this thing you see on TV and maybe it doesn't add up when you actually go out there? And trying to, again, it becomes like this huge mountain you're trying to scale, trying to beat down something that's, you know, being driven into people's minds basically 24/7. But it's also, I don't know, a lot of story to tell, a lot of content to make on the flip side, I guess, which is weirdly opportunistic.
Yeah. Aaron, I'd be curious too, because it sounds like what you're talking about, Bruce, is the weaponization, and I heard this from the journalist panel too, kind of the weaponization of language, or the weaponization of stories, right? Who gets to tell what, and who is the audience for that? And there's danger in that, because I personally believe that stories are the most powerful thing on the planet, right? That's why if you can control a story, you can kind of control people, or the way people think. And I'm just curious if anyone has any thoughts on that. That's kind of a big
So many.
question. Yeah, okay.
Well, I think like storytelling is how you actually change people's minds, and you change their experience. And art and culture and video and music is how you get in there. And I think one of the beautiful things I think about radio does not care about your borders. Radio, so you live in a segregated place, or you live on the border of the United States and Mexico. The Mexican radio stations on the other side of the border don't have the same regulations as American radio stations. So they're just loud and booming, and you learn, like, there's just like the golden era of like Mexican performers that influenced people on that, in that region, because their stations could ignore the border walls. Or like the Cuban the Cuban radio that would like just taunt, get the loud enough signals to like taunt the Florida political situation. That's the whole thing that I can't remember anybody's names or anything, but like, and it doesn't, black music being on black radio gets to white kids, and they want to join the civil rights movement because they're like, feel something in the music. So it's super important to tell the stories in whatever way. People have millions of ways of expressing them. I think with the audiences and who gets to tell a story, like, I made a documentary with a couple friends about the police violence in Portland, and it's on archive.org if you want to listen, if you want to watch it. It's called Arresting Power, Police Violence and Resistance in Portland, Oregon, because for every repression, there is resistance. And so telling the stories of repression over and over is what we hear in the mainstream, because you're just supposed to get pounded down and not think about a different world that you could create. And the stories of resistance are really important, especially in this time, as we are, this is the first fascist government I've lived under. this is not the first fascist government that plenty of our community members have lived under, because part of immigration is escaping fascism or repression. So there are people to learn from in our communities of how we can face and live up and survive and resist what is happening. And, you know, like, how are we going to do that? We're going to tell stories. And we're going to not be able to tell them in places where the way the stories are controlled. Like, I'm assigning you the story, you have to do this, you know, like, we have the freedom and the independence and of being able to tell the stories that we want to. You know, a paycheck might be nice occasionally here and there, you know, for different things, but like, that is not the path that I chose. So, so I really appreciate the freedom that I have to help, you know, get these stories out there and help people be able to resist and survive.
Thank you.
Yeah. We're good. We still have
Okay.
like 2 more minutes on this section, unless we want to move to the other section.
I'll share something. So I got to work with a group of kids last summer through Soul Restoration Center, which was led by Dr. Renee Mitchell. And it's through their I Am More program. I was brought in very last minute by my friend Aaron, because he was teaching the kiddos how to pretty much make music. And that's Aaron's like joy, is education and music with children. So I come in and I'm still trying to get an understanding of what the program is about, who the kiddos are. There were about 16 to 20 of them coming in, and this program lasted most of the summer. They were coming in every week, every day, for hours, just listening to community leaders talk about their experiences, especially growing up in North Portland. And so I sat in, once again, being an observer and witnessing what these children were also having to hear intergenerationally about where they came from. My role was to essentially help as a videographer, because outside of just making the music with the kids, Aaron wanted me to help them make a music video. So that meant just coming in with my camera, showing them how to utilize it and understand how to create scenes, how to create sequences, what does it look like to edit. And I had 2 weeks with them. But what was fascinating to me, the first bit was you have to like obviously instruct them on what to do with this equipment. Sometimes it can be quite intimidating too, especially if this isn't what you're used to using. I also try to encourage them, like, you are a storyteller no matter what medium you are using, be it art, be it something that you draw with, write with. If you have your phone, that is enough. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. And then the second week, it was fully diving into the song, because they finally recorded it in the studio. And when I finally heard the song for the first time, I realized it was a love letter to North Portland. Like, the kiddos dove into their history and just pretty much explained all that happened within their own generations and their pride in being able to continue telling that story for future generations. And that's just so moving in so many different ways. But what I recognized as well in that moment was they were intimidated because they thought it needed to look a specific kind of way. And I think when we come into these spaces, we have to help not just younger generations, but ourselves know that there is an aesthetic. There is a sort of, gosh, I'm looking for the word, but I can't find it. Facade, I would almost say, to how news, stories, or anything like that needs to actually look once it's done. And being with those kids, the impact I felt was that they understood it doesn't need to look any sort of way. It looks the way that you feel it needs to look. It feels good, you're having fun, but you're also telling a story, telling a history, and you learn something, and you're teaching me something. So that impact on just like a very small scale level was enough to just help me understand as I continue with communities, working with them to help them out. I see myself as a facilitator, if anything. I don't, even the concept of being a producer, I'm just like saying to myself, if I'm a producer, you're a producer. Like, I don't want to see that I'm in the credits and you're not. That makes no sense to me. You're the reason why we're doing this. So that's my little bit on community POV.
Storytellers.
That's great.
Celebrating other storytellers. Yeah. next session. Yeah.
All right,
Next
so we're on
topic.
to the final prompt, which is collaborations and reach. As a storyteller myself, who does storytelling events all over, I'm actually curious about collaborations any of you have had, and how have traditional media outlets been collaborators, if at all, in the work that you've done?
Well, since I'm holding the microphone, I think part of it's just, like I said earlier, it's an ecosystem.
Yeah.
So traditional media outlets have a larger reach. When you have the beauty of having so many independent creators is there's the ability to tell so many stories, but also people's attention, people's time, like you can only follow so much. So where people, the common place where they find these stories often is these bigger platforms. And I know even so I mentioned a couple projects earlier, for example, with the Blacktastic Adventure, if I'm being real, like the fact that I got support from Oregon Humanities is a big reason why it had so much traction.
Okay.
With Life After the Bubble, the fact that I had a Think Out Loud interview on OPB is why it got as much traction as it did. There's another project I did during this time, which was the Bruce Poinsett show on the Numbers FM. Now, defunct Numbers FM was Portland's black radio station. But the biggest thing on there, I didn't really get like huge outside media coverage. So but I did do one video on there that got multitude more views than any of these other projects I just mentioned. But what was the topic? It was Kevin Samuels. I'm looking around this audience, that's a Kevin Samuels in the manosphere, which again, I'm not sure if that's
Yeah.
checking out anymore. I want to be cognizant of the 20 minutes we have for this topic.
Yeah.
But basically just like a national media kind of more lowest common denominator thing, because there's also some realisticness about how we consume media and audience. And it's not to say like, I'm talking about some higher level thing that people just don't get. It's like, I know why I'm on IG and Facebook too. It's mostly mess. It's not like whatever, moralistic thing I would love for people to think it is. So understanding that how I consume media, how a lot of people consume media, and being able to mix, like speaking to people where they're at is important. With collaboration, I think part of that is right now, when you see posts that get a lot of traction, you'll see like 5 or 6 collaborators on something, because it's just amplifying reach and understanding trends like that. Or I mentioned video earlier. So doing things on video, doing things where you don't do so much like if you're promoting an event, for anyone in here who does, if you do events, you'll probably notice if I do a flyer with like a small image on it and it's just that, it doesn't get a lot of engagement. A lot of people don't see it. But if I do some carousel of a bunch of photos, like full size, engaging, whatever, like it works. If I follow certain tenets of storytelling just to, again, like very basic fundamental stuff to engage people, it does a better job of actually getting the story out there. Like a lot of this stuff still works. You have to adapt to the times and the mediums, and frankly, like respect whatever medium you're doing. But also kind of to Ranya's point earlier about don't be wed to something just because that's what people say, that's how you have to do it. Be an effective storyteller in whatever medium you're doing. I'd love to do more stuff in puppets, frankly. But
You said puppets?
yes,
Okay,
puppets.
just making sure I
It's
heard
just
that.
like real life conversations, but just in the form of puppets, so you're
Yeah.
paying attention.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
Silly stuff like that. That's
Yeah.
what I'm interested in. But just being able to really think more deeply about what is it you want to say and how can I engage people, and not be afraid to edit. Do a lot of a thing as a writing teacher, I say a lot, is just editing. It's the biggest thing. A lot of people struggle with feedback, but just being able to like try something, I think Jeremiah said earlier, is just put it out there, see how people respond to it, how they engage with it, and keep tooling around and keep learning about your craft to get it out there and collaborate with people doing awesome projects. So saw Aaron's hand.
Yeah.
Well, it's all media is collaborative because, you know, making a video, like how many folks were on the video project that you all made about York? Like,
About 7 of us. Yeah, 7 to 8.
yeah. So it's just working with people is part of the deal with making media, I think. And it's one of the things that I think, this is a tangent, but they'll be very short, of I think people with like using AI tools to help is like, just find a human being to collaborate with. Like, if you're like, AI, make me a drawing of something, you can also just be like, oh, who's that person at the coffee shop that's drawing all the time, sitting there? Like, it's a cheat to increase isolation and also make you feel like you can't do it, because we can all do it if we all work together. And that's part of the media thing. And I think to Bruce's point about the ecosystem, there's a much longer story about this, but I was the executive producer of a podcast called It Did Happen Here, which was about the murder of the Ethiopian immigrant Mulugeta Sarah by neo-Nazi skinheads in 1988, and the community organizing that went on in the wake of his murder, which was massive. And the punk scene had been dealing with the neo-Nazi problem before the murder, but knew it was coming. Different marginalized communities knew it was coming. So when it happened, it wasn't very much a surprise, but to Greater Portland, it was a gigantic surprise because they could ignore it. And then when Eleanor Langer has an amazing book called 100 Little Hitlers, and her point in that was that Portland made a decision to, like, yes, these were neo-Nazi kids who were teenagers in Portland, but they were influenced by a California man who ran the White Aryan Resistance named Tom Metzger. So it wasn't our fault. It was from California. We don't have a problem with the racism of our children. And it's a fantastic book. Eleanor Langer is still alive. She's a brilliant mind. You should take her out for coffee and learn from her. But since Mike Crenshaw features in the book and was one of the narrators of the podcast and a producer, he was in a teenage group in Minneapolis called the Baldies, and they were part of an anti-racist action where it became nationally, but they started it as this group of 7 teenagers that were like, our scene is important to us. These neo-Nazis are coming in thinking that they can do it. We're going to be like, hi, you're wearing a swastika. Next time we see you, we're going to beat you up because we don't want that in our scene. But you give them a chance, because we're all kids here at the time, to get out of there, to be like, oh, are you doing this for fashion? Are you fooling around? Like, I can't judge where you're coming from, but if you come around again, we're going to have to, take
Have an
care of
issue.
business.
Yeah.
Throw hands.
You are not welcome here if you're going to have those attitudes. Because many major cities in America were having those problems at the time, wildfire. And anti-racist action became a national group. I was not involved with the Portland group. I was involved with other groups at the time. But we all knew when Mulugeta got murdered, it went through the network like that. So when I moved to Portland in 1994, I was like, there's no neo-Nazis here anymore. What happened? Oh, anti-racist action happened. And I knew the people who were involved, but they were also dealing with, like, I've been fighting people for 6 years. Every time you're like, I'm just trying to go to the Safeway. There's a neo-Nazi. Okay, now I have to get in a fight in the parking lot instead of getting my groceries. Like, and there's a traumatic stress. Everyone's dealing with post-traumatic stress. We, again, are all very young people. We don't have tools. We end up drinking a lot. People don't survive. Plenty of people get therapy and do. Mike Crenshaw moves to Portland in the 90s because he's getting away from that in Minneapolis. We're not telling our stories to people. 2018, the Proud Boys start coming to Portland to, just claim some white supremacy here. People are standing up against them. But the young people who are standing up against them do not have the greater community support that happened after the Mulugeta Surah murder. And they're like, it's Antifa. They're breaking window. We're uncomfortable with violence. All legitimate feelings, but you can't let these kids defend your city for you without supporting them. So we're like, we lived through this. How can we tell our stories to these kids so they don't feel alone? How can we tell the story to Greater Portland so that they step up and support these kids who are the first line of defense against neo-Nazis? So we made a podcast because that's what we could do. And the people in the podcast would talk to us because it was our story also. And we made a podcast. And then we made a book. And then the thing I'm most proud of is there's high school curriculum to teach this book.
Cool.
And getting to the point, there is now a OPB video independent producer group who's making a 1-hour documentary about this story. And it was going to be a half an hour, and then they're like, there's so much to tell. Now it's an hour. I don't actually know when it's coming out, because when it was a half hour, it was going to be last February. So it's in the works, but they're interviewing all these people from the book. They're using the book as, in the podcast, as what to base their story on. And I am very proud of that. But also, they have way more resources. These people are getting paid to do it. They can use better equipment that didn't matter to us when we were making a podcast. But, if this is going to be on the OPB to then maybe get to the national, I agree that it doesn't, for my purposes, using whatever microphones are around is fine, but because they're in a different part of the ecosystem, they have different resources and they have different needs. But that's not my problem. My role is to I think what someone was talking about, it was it's coming up from the underground. And so we can be here's this from our story, and they can reach down and grab it and get it out in the world. And that is a healthy way of storytelling to work, and I hope that their editors are great and that they don't make it a true crime, blah, 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 blah.
Yeah.
But if they do, we still have the podcast that's telling my story and our truth from the underground.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's funny when you're bringing this up, it makes me think about, and this is just the organizer in me, but coalition building as a method in which we all need to engage with each other on a community level, and through this ecosystem, acknowledging where we might have certain gaps, that if we address them, it can help get our story out there, get our story funded, properly resourced and supported. My partner and I, we had started a nonprofit called National Coalition for Social Advancement, and one of our strategic initiatives is elevating community voices. And so in doing this work with other groups that I've done so far in these last couple years, what I've acknowledged as well is that I could be working on one project and easily with another project identify a need that they may have, and then those two projects can get together. Even though they're telling two separate stories, they're resource sharing, and through that they're also activating avenues in which their constituents that are witnessing these stories be told are also watching other people's stories be told too, that might not have to do with the person they were originally following. So if we can think about ways in which I love the organizer hat because it means we have to literally engage with each other. I think, like you said, we oftentimes think we can work in isolation because we have the technology now to do so. And I do worry about what that can do for the future of journalism, for the future of storytelling. One of the other things you brought up that I loved, I grew up as well in a Haitian household where everyone was an oral storyteller. That is how we pass down traditions, information, joy, pain, and if we can utilize the craft of oral storytelling in all the different ways we talk to each other, that's why I'm saying it starts with our conversations. You'll see that, oh, I'm telling you about a story that I'm producing right now, but I don't have a videographer because I don't have this resource. Well, I actually, you know, I'm at school and I have access to free equipment as a student. Let me come on and help you out. And that is just enough to get the story done. Because a lot of times what happens to a story that is delayed is because there isn't proper support. So through my nonprofit with my partner, we've been able to identify those needs. Like, even on a research level, community-based research, qualitative research, which often gets pit against quantitative and is not seen as something that is, you know, credible. We have to utilize that, and storytelling allows us to do that. So I see all of this once again as part of the ecosystem, and I appreciate y'all bringing that up.
Wow, that's amazing. Thank you. How are we with time?
We are doing well for time.
Awesome.
If anyone else wants to share thoughts, we got about 4 more minutes.
I'll
Yeah.
do a quick. So the funny thing I've been going through, like, kind of lately, is we used to call them partnerships, and now we're collaborating with people. And I just don't know when that transition kind of happened. But this collaboration piece is a lot like what everybody is talking about here, because we can't do it alone. And I can't, like, keep the client or the subject on the other side of a fence that I can't get through. We need to be on the same page. And you're right, sometimes there's so many obvious connections, and why don't I just open my mouth and say, do you know about blah blah blah? And by the way, I have talked to Aaron about making his music show for kids. So that's just the way in which this ecosystem should work is really in the hands of people that can really speak to it and understand it from different dimensions, like the previous panel, as you say, kind of fusing with this panel is very interesting, and the line is very thin, and it's almost exciting when you think about it. I want to go back to the collaboration, maybe with the news media, because I've been doing this for 25 years, and I think it's happened 3 times, and that's, you know, 2 of them were in the Bay Area, and basically the engineer at the station I also worked at Fox News, so our stuff managed to make it over there a couple of times. And we've only done 1 here, and that was like morning show television for our food show, Food Foray. So it just kind of, there's a real kind of disconnect there at times when I really believe we have so much value. And just because we do it in a slightly longer or slower way doesn't mean it's any less. It's just as powerful, it's just as potent. People should be able to see it and hear it, and that's really all.
Yeah.
Awesome. Yeah, I think this is a good time to transition to audience questions. Yeah.
Well,
Yeah.
thank you so much for that discussion.
Thank you.
Patty.
Yeah, really amazing conversation.
Hopefully there's some,
So yeah,
folks from the
there.
audience?
Yeah, same thing. Come on up.
you have a question for our panel? Yeah, please,
Yeah.
step up.
Hi, my name is Julia. I'm a co-host on X-Ray FM, and
I'm on the board.
hello. My question actually involves you, John. So, the sex trafficking PSA and the lawn chemical PSA seemed pretty successful in part because like fear was involved, and that's like a similar dynamic with like the Bruce, I think you called it propaganda, like fear is an element there. And I'm really wondering, especially because I just went to a meeting in District 1 and fear was like a huge theme there, especially with older adults in relation to things happening in the city. What is your method for handling fear-inducing information, and what other emotions effectively engage audiences?
I probably can't answer the fear bit of it, But I learned very early on that I need to speak to more people than me about what is actually happening. So let's say I thought if I shamed 18-year-olds, they would vote. No, that was the wrong tactic completely. So that's where I will always try and get input from other places, just research and people to kind of make sure that I'm not crossing a line and doing it in a clump and doing it in a really clumsy way.
Yeah, I'd say yes, uplifting, interviewing, specifically when it comes to the propaganda piece, uplifting mutual aid groups and those who are, one, like serving the community in like very much community-driven ways, but also, you know, having like I was about to say antidote, that's not the word, but again, just like showing the people who are doing this work, showing examples of other ways to deal with these problems than these, you know, fear-based solutions, these police state solutions that don't actually make us safer, and really leaning into sort of like the human interest side of that, because the work itself is important, but it's also, you know, we're character-driven people when it comes to stories. So uplifting, I keep saying uplifting, but like really just like talking to the people who do this work and being able to show that they're not just, you know, they're not just like walking, talking ideologies, but also human beings, you know. It's really like human beings just like you, but like really, that's the thing.
We talked about like constantly reinforcing this message of like repression and not putting spotlights on the building, right? And when people are rewarded by their fear with some sense of safety, I guess, is the reward for all of that, maybe. But we need to give people, like you said, like maybe antidote isn't the right word. Hope, hope, possibility. Yeah.
I know this was directed to other folks, but one of the things that I spoke on a panel about last week, we were in conversation about monuments because we were talking about the Portland Monuments Project and what they're doing to bring back certain statues. And all I could think about was, even in the scope of York, for me, my first engagement and understanding of York was through fear and tragedy. It was the bus breaking. And I mentioned to folks, I think it happened, so we do have to talk about it, but what ways now can we change that narrative so that way it's a focus on something else? Meaning, as I endeavor to do the documentary, at first I thought, you know, there's this video out there of a woman who is actually spray painting the bus and cussing and doing all sorts of things. It's sensational, it's evocative, and it gets your attention. But I thought to myself, I would really hate for folks to have that be the first thing they see and experience about a very pivotal figure in American history that is also influencing modern history. So then I thought about other avenues in which to engage folks. And the one concept I thought about was Black joy, because that's what I've been witnessing since the start of this work, is people being joyous, being creative, finding restorative practices to once again have conversations about things that are, yes, happening in the city that they might not be pleased about, but they're pleased that they can be in community with each other and talk about it and then some. So I would say when it comes to seeing how you will tell the story, like Bruce was pointing out, it's about uplifting. It really is. And if we can also begin to see that the human experience really is driven by, I hate to say positivity, but like we want these things as people. We understand that part of the human experience is adversity too, but we have for too long made that the point in which we start our stories. So that's just something to share.
And I would also say, like those radio waves that you talked about, the same can be said of stories. They cross cultures. They do not stop, right? You can relate. Like, I might not have anything in common with John. I guarantee you there's a story there where it's like, whoa, Scotland? I'm from Michigan, and I'm vibing to what you're talking about right now. And that's the power of stories, too. Sorry, John, I feel like
I also think like all these things, like great minds. I love it. And then if you want to engage with the people who are actually afraid, like, that's time and relationship building. Like, what actually are you afraid of? And then we can get to the history of, like, why do you want to give more money to the police? Because this is what we've done over and over, and it's actually not changing the situation. So let's make some new mistakes. Let's do a different thing. Because if you can, as a reporter, you know, like, how long have we been trying to fund the police to a feeling of safety for all of our communities? Like, way too long to still be doing the same stuff. Like, no. And that's part of, like, the 2020 thing that I thought was, you know, just, again, a sadly missed opportunity, where we're like, let's get Portland Street response. Let's do something different. And then just struggling to get it to finally where it's fully funded, I believe, ish. Talk to Donovan about the ish. But, like, okay, so we're maybe about to be able to, like, have a new experiment to do something different for our city. And the people, you know, like, people are afraid for whatever, you know, like, the reasons make sense in their heads. So it's your guys' job. It's all of our jobs to get in there and, like, get it out.
Thank you so much.
Step in. I don't know if it's an inquiry. I don't know if it's a formed question, but this is something I've been thinking about. I've been looking at a way to tell the stories of people who found what I call the civic sweet spot, the thing they're doing that they feel really like. All of you, you're telling your civic sweet spot, how you're making a difference in a way that's satisfying to you. And I think a lot of people in Portland are doing that. And I'd love to see if we couldn't shine a light on how people are finding ways to feel like they're making a meaningful contribution. And I think some people do it through their talent and skills. Some people do it because they volunteer out of their heart. Other people give it, they're trying to deal with policy and other, you know, what I call voice. And other people are doing it through philanthropy. But I just thought, wouldn't it be powerful if what we could do is really shine a light on those stories, but do it in a way that also lets other people think about, how do I find my civic sweet spot? Some way in which I can make a difference and connect and feel like I can contribute. And why I came here is I was trying to figure out, how can the media be an ally in that work? Because you know those stories. You know those places, you know those people. And I've been talking to a lot of people. Like, there's this couple that works at Blanchet House, and their story about why they go there is it said it enriches my relationship with my wife. And we love it. We had to, he even said I had to negotiate because I wanted to look at Blanchet House and she wanted to be at Rosehaven. So we do it every other week and we go back and forth. And then this older lady older than me even, she's like in her 80s, and she said, I go to Blanchet House, and on my way, I'm Chinese, and I go to the Chinese tea house afterwards. It's my personal time as well as my community time. And I guess I'm trying to see, how do we think about creating spaces? And I've even thought about, why don't we have a community page? We have sports pages, entertainment pages. Why don't we highlight in a community page what it is different sectors are doing? The faith-based communities, the for-profit sector. There's a lot of people who are B Corps. They're doing pretty amazing things. Some people are being innovative. Some people are in education. Some people, and I just feel like, how do we create a collective? Because my concern is we tend to want to find a place to blame, but not where we have a sense that we are actually all co-responsible. And if we can find ways to work together and sort of share that in a more public way, we could create a different kind of momentum, a kind of different narrative. Portland, I think, anyway, I don't know what my question is, other than I'm really trying to figure out, how can we kind of create a different way of thinking? Because I thought each sector could say, like, if you're a business, here's these organizations that can help you. Or if you're a faith-based, here's a place that could connect to you. So anyway, I just love your thoughts
on how to shine a light on our civic sweet spot.
I mean, at first, I like civic sweet spot just as like a trademark that.
Well, help me do that.
But some kind of like small community papers do something similar to this, depending on where you are. So like, I grew up in Lake Oswego. Lake Oswego Review will have this space in their paper to like shine a light on like community, kind of like, maybe not necessarily like civic sweet spot, but like kind of this type of story. But I'd say like, one, finding like a medium, like even if it's like, I'm not on TikTok, I have no interest in being on it, but you know, short form video and like interviews with people, being able to, again, just like pull out the characters who are doing this work. Because just even in the examples you said, like that just speaks to like a human interest piece that could speak to people, maybe just again in short form video. And also I would just say it kind of comes back to storytelling in terms of what I think about when you talk about that is just do a little J school nerd stuff here, where one of the things we learn is this idea of like the 7 story types. So it's like kind of like these basic ways to tell. I like that. Yeah, just sort of these basic, almost like elementary ways to tell stories that, frankly, like when I was in school, I hated, because it was like this idea of like the quest, the classic underdog story, the overcoming the monster, the tragedy. Like, stories are more complex than that. What I learned kind of, again, through like trial and error is you use these archetypes as a way to make things that either are not maybe readily appealing or readily familiar, more familiar to people, to kind of like cut across these areas, or again, like reach people where they're at. So like, it can be hard, especially with human interest pieces and like positive stories. Just to be real with you, I used to do a lot of like community profiles when I was at the Scanner, and one of the more difficult pieces of feedback I got from someone who I actually did such a piece on was like, oh, people don't feel the pain in your stories enough. And it's like, ooh, I don't know what to deal with that. And it's not necessarily to say, oh, should you just make a bunch of tragedy porn? No. But it does mean like being able to dig into, with any story, even if it's not necessarily traumatic, like being able to find like that newsworthy piece or that hook, or to the more, and again, this is going to sound kind of baity here, but like finding the conflict in the story that gets people's attention and being able to hook on that again. And you can do that with positive things. A lot of times these, like what you're highlighting is people responding to the issues in the world and responding to that larger conflict, responding to systems, responding to, again, like this idea of overcoming the monster, of like, how am I responding to systemic poverty by volunteering here, by doing this work, and being able to frame it like that is just like, there's plenty of people who go to these, go to nonprofit talks and things like this and like, what can I do? What can I do? And you're answering that question. Find your civic sweet spot. Again, trademark that. Make the series.
We have just about one more.
I'll try and go really quickly here. I believe Portland is the second most civically engaged city in America. I did a bunch of civic engagement videos that were involved with Multnomah Bar Foundation. Okay. So lawyers wanted to kind of do that stuff. You have incredible institutions like Open Signal and Metro East who train you to make videos, tell your stories, make podcasts. We're very friendly and we're very inexpensive. So those options are just there, right there for you. And I think it's civic sweet spot. Yeah, absolutely.
Like we have Match.com. I thought PDXMatch.com. Find your civic sweet spot.
All right. Thank you, everybody. Thank you again to the panel. That was a wonderful discussion. Rania, John, Bruce, Aaron, really appreciate it. Appreciate all of you for coming out. And we're going to kick it back over to our hosts, Courtney and Kayla.
Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Kristen, our moderators, for being here. Thank you, audience. You could turn around, thank each other. Thank you to our sponsors, the Agora Journalism Center at the U of O and CityCast Portland. Our partners, City Club and Kickstand Comedy. Where's Paul? Is Paul still here? Thanks, Paul. Thank you also to our production crew. They're in the booth over there, and some of them are still on the cameras here. And yes, Open Signal will arm wrestle Metro East to produce Civic Sweet Spot whenever you're ready. Let us know. Thank you all for being here. The panelists from panel 1, if you wouldn't mind coming up here for a bow and have the whole group here. Just get one more round of applause. We really appreciate having everyone here today and taking the time to share your thoughts. These are the faces. You can catch them in the lobby for a moment.